I wish that I could freely dream and be judged from within, haunted by a power that cannot see past my skin. My views are viewed as ignorant, my truth always denied.
All right, got our cue. Welcome back to At the Round Table with me. I'm your host, Larry Elson, in studio with my brother from another, back from the nation's capital. Good morning, Dr. Bradley. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. It's nice to be back, man.
Oh, my goodness. There's so much going on, man. Just can't keep up with it, but we're going to try.
We're going to do the best we can because our responsibility is to educate.
Absolutely.
You do what you want to do with the information.
Yeah.
We can't be in control of that. Our job is to give it to you.
Yeah, there you go. Unfiltered.
Right? Yeah.
And then you can decide what you want to do.
Amen.
With that knowledge. But we want to thank our sponsor, Guarantee Rate Mortgage, for all your Guarantee Mortgage. For all your mortgage needs, give branch manager Cora Holbrook a call at area code 781-342-0252. Guarantee Mortgage is located at 75 State Street in downtown Boston, Mass. Guarantee Rate Mortgage Company, guaranteed to exceed your expectations. Speaking of education, Dr. Bradley, we have on the line our guest, Dave Searles from SOS. Save Our Schools is back, giving us an update. Matter of fact, he was on as a guest, him and Renee Callender, who is a retired detective who works with the organization. And they started this group because of the violence they're seeing in the schools here in the city of Boston. And it's really taken off. And I commend them because there's such a commitment and there's a lot of work that is being done to hold accountable. And that's what some folks feel accountability is not blame. And that's where folks start to dig in. It's like, oh, you're blaming me for what we're not blaming you, but you are entrusted. You're the ones who said you want the job of educating, you want the job of making our kids safe. So yeah, I'm not blaming you, but I'm asking you what's your answers, what's your solution. So I want to thank Dave and his crew for continuing this. Dave, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Good morning. Good morning, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being up so early. And like I said, last time when we spoke, we're going to make sure we continue to give you a voice and a vessel to get this out there. Because I have to ask you, Dave, since your last appearance, a lot of folks have preached up and I passed along your information. People want to get involved, but they're a little afraid. They're intimidated by the system, and I commend you and your group for not backing down and continuing to highlight this most important issue. This is our future, and it's not looking good.
Well, I think that's right in a number of ways. So we talk with parents, we talk with staff and teachers who are afraid to speak out for different reasons. For teachers and staff in schools, that there might be some kind of retribution on them in some way in terms of their job, position, advancement, and then parents may be feeling the same way for their child who's still in that school if they're to speak out in a way that would be addressing these things. So it's such a challenging thing, and we're trying to be the voice for folks, but we also want to encourage folks to be willing to take that courageous step, because if it's not just one or two, but if it's 100, 200, the possibility of retribution becomes lessened, and the opportunity to shine the light on the truth. And in your introduction, it was, I think, so well, is that we're not casting aspersions over the wall at school personnel and administration. We just simply want to say, and this is why we began, to simply say, folks, we need to recognize we have a problem.
Right.
And let's begin with that. Let's say we have a problem, and what can we do together? And we really entered into this with the idea, hey, we're willing to be partners. We're not just yelling over the wall. Right. We want to work together. So I think that's right. That's important. And education is so important. And safety is the foundation of a good education. If we don't have safe schools, we're not going to be able to educate our children.
Right. And I think you're right. And thank you for highlighting that, Dave, because I think if people realize that right now the state is still looking at taking over the Boston public school system, right? And it is not because of law enforcement, but you're right. We all know that if you don't provide a safe environment, there's very little learning, if any, that's going to take place. And we can see that in some of our suburban school districts, right, where they, not saying it's the best learning, but at least they're not bogged down every day with the type of violence, the type of disruption that we're seeing here in Boston. And it's not just in the BPS, it's in the school system, it's in the charter schools, and we're seeing it now, unfortunately, an uptick in even some of the private schools. We've been dealing with some issues of late. They're isolated, they're not as commonplace, but one is too many. One is too many in our school system. I mean, what's alarming, there was an incident the other day down in Colorado. I don't know if you've heard of that, Dr. Bradley. There was a young student who was in a safety plan because he had a propensity of bringing weapons to school.
Why is he in school then?
Well,
why is he?
They had a safety plan in place every day for him to be checked, and they checked him on numerous cases. That was part of his day. When he came in, his bag had to be checked. The other day, they checked him. He has a firearm. He starts to struggle with the staff. He shoots the two staff members, and then he takes off. They found him dead the next day. He had been able to get away. But this is I think he was 17 years old, right? I mean, if you have a safety plan, and now you have two people who are still school personnel, not law enforcement, you know he has a propensity for weapons, and yet there's not a police officer greeting him?
I'm saying that I was going to say is that the safety plan could not have been, in my opinion, not well thought out, because there should not have been school administrators. There should have been law enforcement doing that, who were trained in getting that done, and also removing the weapon from him if they should actually come across one. So I think that it was ill-conceived, in my opinion. As it relates to that, I want to make sure I put this out here, because I'm over 60, it's not going to stay long. As it relates to security and education, I often go back to, when I explain the need for this to my students, I go back to Abraham Maslow, who was an American psychologist that actually looked at the innate needs of people to explain progress, and he created this thing called the triangle or Maslow hierarchy of needs. Safety is security is the second layer of that hierarchy. So what he's basically saying is that you have to go through, satisfy these needs before you can go up this hierarchy with physiological needs like food and sex and all that stuff that we have to have as human beings, got to be satisfied before we get to security. Well, education is at the very top of that hierarchy, which is self-actualization. I say all that to say that one cannot be educated if those bottom needs are not taken care of. So if your security is not taken care of, you can forget about education, Jack, because it's not happening.
And I think before we go back there, a good example of that was I went to school during busing. It was very difficult to learn when I knew I was going into this violence. So we saw the decline in education because it was a safe environment to learn in, right? So we have an example that we know if we don't fix that component of it, the education piece is going to be lacking in non-existent.
But I say all that to say is what I'm seeing in the Boston public school system today, all right, there cannot be much education happening if we have violence at the level that we're having it. Because while the students are hearing about linear equations and all these different types of things that we give our students to deal with, to be able to work in an industrial society that's not here, by the way. You know what I mean? It's overseas, but that's another conversation. They can't begin to learn if they got to worry about fighting themselves in and fighting themselves out of the school.
I agree.
Doesn't make any sense.
You're listening at the Roundtable with Mamie. The caller number here is 617-282-0685. 617-282-0685. On the line is our guest, Dave Searles from SOS Save Our Schools. If you have a child in the school system and this is impacting them, give us a call. We want to hear from you, because this impacts your child. Even if your child is in a safe environment learning, they're still impacted by the violence that is going around them. So, Dave, I have a question. Why does Boston SOS say that the city of Boston has a school safety crisis? Because folks feel that, and they feel like, again, we're saying they feel like we're blaming them for this problem, but these are the folks who said, I'm the best person for the job. I'm the superintendent of the schools. I'm the chief of safety services for the Boston Public Schools, and I'm tasked with this. But then in my opinion, there's a pushback when you're saying, what are you doing to alleviate, or what's your plan to deal with this?
Yeah, no, good points. When we started, we were simply trying to connect the dots in terms of the incidents that we would hear about in the media, and to connect the dots that these are not just isolated incidents in a school in one part of the district, and then maybe another random incident, but these were consistent and overall throughout the system, which is. It's like taking the temperature of your child. You see that there's something wrong, and we need to do something. Right. And BPS, obviously, that's a huge organization. It's not easy to turn the ship. Right. It takes some time to do that, and yet to begin by recognizing that there are these serious issues that we need to acknowledge. Number one. And number two, begin to strategize on what to do about it. And we've had school superintendents, a high rate of turnover in Boston. That doesn't lend itself to a consistency and a good development in the administration and overall in the school. But it also means that the people at the top need to recognize that this is, and Dr. Bradley, thank you for mentioning that hierarchy of needs, because this can't be one of a number of things we need to address. This needs to be the thing to address to get at the other things that we need to address and do in education. Right. So it can't get pushed off, or it can't be among a high list of a number of things. We believe this needs to be the thing we need to get right in order that we can get the other things right. In education. Because if there's not safety, whatever we do in terms of adjusting curriculum, and all the other things that we might do in schools, it's not going to be successful because we don't have the safety piece. Right.
So, Dave, we have seen an increase in the budget for the Boston Public Schools. It's right now south of, I should say, of close to $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion with a B, right? We've seen a decrease in the number of students in the Boston Public Schools, but we've seen an increase in the violence, right? So how does the two come together where you have less people but you have more violence? You would think that if the numbers tailed off, right, and we know we're seeing them siphoned into the charter schools, and they're all kind of incorporated because the money is coming out of the same fund, because if you're in a charter school, the money is coming from the taxpayers in the city of Boston and the Boston Public School budget. But shouldn't there be a decline if we have less people in the system? But that's the only thing we seem to be increasing in, not on the learning capability, but on the violence.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good observation and good questions. We need to keep asking those questions. And so it suggests that it's not always a money issue. Sometimes, we hear it from politicians, we hear it from citizens and residents. We need, and the go-to solution is, well, we just need more money. Maybe not the case. We need to have a strategy in place and maybe more astutely use the money we have. So to throw more money in the wrong direction isn't going to answer solve the problem. I can have a problem in the foundation of my house and throw money in fixing a crack in the wall, and then keep throwing money in the crack in the wall, but it's not dealing with the main issue.
That's a great analogy.
And I think that's what we need to do. We need to really be clear about what the issues are. Right. And there was a time in Boston where the city was falling apart. Violence was off the charts. I'm talking about the 90s. That's when I moved to Boston. At the very beginning, I moved in 1990, and my goodness, the city was in crisis. The homicide rate was off the charts, and what it did was it caused people or forced people to say, we need all hands on deck. We need to work not just within our own little institution, but we need to work across the board, across the city too, and get everybody on board. And figure out how we can work together to solve this. And that happened. Right. You had schools, you had law enforcement, you had clergy in churches, you had the government officials and everybody, because nobody knew what to do. I mean, the thing's falling apart. You had a shooting in a church, for goodness sake, at Morning Star Baptist Church, and all of this stuff happening. But it galvanized a moment where people said, we got to work, we got to do something, and it moved people together in a way that was really historic to solve some problems. And I think we've forgotten those lessons over time. We've lost that, and so we're trying to say we're at a crisis level, and we need to get back to figuring out how we can work across the board, across the city, to resolve these things.
It's interesting that you bring that up when you talk about the crisis, because Pastor Wall, who was one of the founders, actually founder of this radio station here, and he would always come and talk about there was a crisis, a public safety emergency here in Boston, and don't say that, it scares people, that we have a crisis with the violence, and he took a lot of heat for exactly what you're saying as it amounts to our schools here, that we have a crisis. And folks, if you're not good in dealing with crises, you probably shouldn't be in the business of dealing with, because as you said, we've had quite a turnaround in superintendents. Madison Park comes to mind, where that's a school that's either level 4, level 5, in which that means is that the state is in jeopardy of taking over that school. And a lot of our high schools here in Boston are at that stage. I know Dr. Bradley's face looking, yes. So even when they're in that space, they're saying that the quality of the education is not where it should be for your students there, and we need to address that. But again, we can't address when constantly teachers are more like firemen, and putting out fires all day long. And to your point about, I like what you said about when folks back in the day, we saw a problem, we came together. And I was encouraged somewhat when there was a recent press conference when Reverend Groover was saying we need to get back to what worked. Right, we need these relationships. We need to get back to where people working together know each other, and they're building that relationships. We have silos. We have the folks at BPS, in my opinion, somewhat have drawn a line in the sand that anyone who challenges or questions us in any way that we see as blame, we're not going to work with you.
But Larry, I'm sitting over here listening to the conversation, and I'm saying to myself, well, we have a crisis at the student level, but if you don't extinguish that problem, you're also going to have a crisis at the teachers level, regardless of how much money you're making, because people don't want to work.
They're walking away.
Exactly.
They're short around 600.
I can imagine.
Right. And it's the same thing in the law enforcement profession as well. So, Dave, to that point, Dr. Bradley's point there, what are the parents, because I know a lot of them feel like there's nothing they can do. They're trapped in this system. What are they saying to you, and what's a plan that they're approaching with this? Because their kids are the ones who are stuck in this. I mean, those who can navigate and get their kids into the medical system or in one of the exam schools, they have a better shot. But the vast majority of them not going to make it there. What are these parents saying here?
Yeah, a good point. And I was just thinking, let me just add this in, and then I'll answer your question, that here we are in the city of Boston, where we have, in the metro Boston area, 66 institutions of higher education that people around the world think, when they think of Boston, they think of education.
Wow.
The top levels of people around the world come here to study, and some of those go back to be the top level officials in their country at different places.
Can you say President Obama, right? To name a few, right?
Oh, exactly. Exactly. A beautiful example.
Hillary Clinton went to Wellesley.
Right. Hillary Clinton went to Wellesley, and all the you can name, you can go down the list. All the top officials in our country. How many judges, how many, and go on and on and on it goes. People in medicine, so on. And yet, when you go down to the level of the public education system, you see an entirely different thing, and you're going, "Oh my goodness, how could this be?" And it's how could this be allowed? That's what I feel. How could this be? This is not acceptable.
Do you think that has something to do with the population of the people that attend? That close to 90% of the students in the Boston public schools are black and brown. Dr. Bradley's already nodding his head yes.
Oh man, good question. Good question. Yeah, I came across the statistics that 55, just a couple weeks ago, 55% of the population of Boston is white, or 50, a little over 50, and 15% of the school population, public school population, is white.
Think about that.
So the disparity there. So the people who are voting and carrying the weight aren't necessarily the people who have their children in school, right? So that's an excellent point. There's a political element to that that's taking place. So, right, black and brown children are primarily the students in the schools, and yet they're the ones most deeply affected, adversely affected by this reality, which is interesting because that's some of the pushback we get from some of our proposals. You're criminalizing black and brown children. Well, what we think is we're victimizing black and brown children continually with the way it is, and there has to be, there has to be some thoughtful and honest conversations, not bullet point things. I get tired of the media kind of model of conversation. We're going to get a quote from this organization, and then we'll get a corresponding vote for the opposite viewpoint, one sentence. And so we have one-sentence proposals, and we never go any deeper. The conversations have to go deeper than that. So, for example, when we suggest we need safe schools, and our proposal has 3 elements, and we came up with this after being asked continually, we were asking for the school, these are the professionals, these are the people who have the time, are getting paid. We're just simply saying there's an issue, please come up with a strategy, and we're willing to work with you, but nothing. And people would ask us, well, what do you think should be done? And so we came up with a proposal that people are welcome to look on our website. It's at bostonsos.com. 3 primary elements, and there's a number of subpoints, but 3 primary elements. One is a comprehensive early intervention strategy, where as early as we can, when a child is struggling, having difficulty, or behavioral issues, that we recognize that and bring the necessary resources to bear to help that child turn around academically. Sometimes it's an academic issue. I'm acting up because I don't understand the class. I don't want to look like a dodo, and I'm going to be the funny guy and be disruptive or whatever. And so sometimes it's an academic thing. Sometimes it's behavioral, emotional, social. And so there needs to be a place for counseling and mental health services. But also to bring to bear not just on the child, but to encompass the family, because often those things are interconnected, and we need to bring not in a retribution thing. Hey, we're punishing you, but hey, we're seeing a problem here, and maybe together we can figure out how to help your son and daughter, and work together, and bring parents and grandparents or whoever the caregiver is, to bring them in the process, and to bring the community in to that process as well. Resources that are not just only school-based, but also might be community-based. That again could be a help in making a difference in a young child's life. So early intervention is key. We lay out some different points at different age junctures. One of the things that's been lost, for example, in the early intervention strategy that was an effective one is a program called Operation Homefront that allowed for middle schools to connect children, young people who are having difficulty. Often they would be behavioral issues, and to a team that would go out, team made up of 2 Boston Police Department school police officers and a clergy person to go visit, not to arrest anybody, but simply to go as an intervention. And I know I went on a number of visits, very effective, to kind of connect with parents who, in every case I went, were already looking for some answers. They were struggling in knowing what to do with their child. They were doing their best, and the child wasn't responding to their interventions, and they needed some community help. And so we could connect them to a social worker embedded in the local police station. We could connect them with, hey, there's a youth program down here. What do you like to do? Oh, I like sports, or I like art, or I like the music. And we could connect them with some local community organizations.
And to your point, it was service driven, right? It wasn't
very much
about
very
punishing.
Much. And and we hear this from schools. Schools will say, hey, we can't do everything, to which we agree. So why not then develop intentionally a kind of partnership that intentionally connects the student in your school struggling with the community.
Right.
So you mentioned people working in silos. There's a real resistance to that, and I get some of it. We don't want to divulge people's personal information publicly. That's not fair. And yet there ought to be a way that we could get at that with the cooperation of parents to be able to do that, whether it's sign a waiver form or whatever the case would be, to give some thoughtful reflection. Yeah. Because in many cases, parents don't know what to do.
Right.
I know I'm working with a family that mom, she doesn't know what to do for her young sons, and they don't come home for a couple of days.
Right.
They just don't come, and she can't do anything. What do I do?
Right.
I tell them to come home, and they just don't.
Right.
So that there needs to be, this broader partnership in an intentional way.
Right.
Again, not to bring some kind of negative retribution, again we hear the school to prison pipeline language, which gets all twisted up in a way that creates the barriers.
Right. So, Dave, I want to grab this call in a second, but I want to highlight something you just said, because, you're right. I mean, they changed the age of criminal responsibility. It used to be age 7, which was ridiculous, and I don't even recall any 7-year-old ever being arrested. And they moved it up to anyone under the age of 12 is not criminally responsible for their behavior, no matter what they do. I don't disagree with that. But the problem is there was nothing put in place to deal with the behavior, because the kids didn't get the notice that the behavior has to stop, right? The behavior, it may not be labeled as criminal, but it is a crime under every other definition.
But before you get the call, I'm going to go back a little bit to the stats around white versus black people, or people of color being in the school system. And my question was to myself, when you said it, Dave, was how many of that 17% or 15% are in the Latin or the exam schools?
I can tell you right now, it's around 9 or 10%. I went into those numbers. Exactly.
So 2/3. So 2/3 of the white students are in the exam schools that are doing.
Exactly.
So you only got one. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and good point. And the other little secret about that, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I didn't know that data. So thank you. That's helpful going forward. The other secret is the white students who go in the exam schools, they're not in the elementary and middle school.
Right.
They're going to private school and then jumping back in to take the exam.
Yeah, exactly, right? To relieve that financial burden. Yeah, they get them prepared to attend it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's one of the first things I looked at when I came into the unit. For full disclosure, I work in the school unit for the Boston Police Department, and I looked at it, and it was amazing to me. I looked at the numbers. I'm like, wow, only a small percentage of white students are in failing schools.
And the majority of the white students that's in the Boston public school system are in the exam schools. Right. That's what you're saying to me.
That's what the numbers are saying to you. Let's bring this caller in. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the roundtable.
Hey, good morning. This is Jamal calling in. How y'all doing?
Good morning, Jamal.
Good morning,
I know this is something that's near and dear to your heart.
Yes, indeed. So, it's funny because as I hear the conversation, first thing, this is David. Is the name David?
Yeah, David Searles.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So some of the things I just want to offer a different perspective, because what you said is we have to have larger conversations, and so we do. So some of the things that you noted as things that were helpful to my community, there are many of us in the community who view those things as actually harmful, right? Or at least ineffective. As we know, definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Okay? Let's go back to, I'll start in the beginning first, the closest one first. What you talked about as Operation Homefront. This is really how Larry and I met, because before that it was called Operation Safe Homes. And I'm one of the people who led the charge in the community to shut it down. Not because we had a problem with children getting identified or getting services or anything like that, but the way that it was written out, it could come from an anonymous tip from a counselor or a teacher who says, hey, we think Johnny may have a gun. And then, as you note, clergy, officer could then show up in little Johnny's home, have a conversation with the mother, in my view, basically trick them into waiving all of their constitutional rights and allowing a search, an illegal search of their home. for an elite, an anonymous tip because little Johnny might have a weapon. So people like myself were just like, that's a slippery slope. Okay. The second point I'll bring you to.
So let me just address that one right quickly, Jamal, because I think so for folks who don't understand is that you're right. That's where Jamal and I really first started meet, and I was in agreement with Jamal is that should not have been part of the component of Homefront, and they wanted to add that to it, where basically if someone said that your child had a firearm, that was enough to get these folks together and go in there under the guise that you were coming in for a friendly visit and to ask for permission to search the home for the weapon. And I got a lot of pushback because I allowed Jamal to have a community meeting to discuss this on whether or not parents in the community thought this was a value to this piece. So it got tainted, and now it looked like the Homefront, which started out and went back to it. That never developed because of Jamal's advocacy in the community of not having that attached to it. But there is a lot of good that comes out. So I just wanted to clear that up for folks that is not what was taking place because of that advocacy, and rightfully so.
Well, but before we move on, understanding that once you allow someone in your home as a police officer to make a search, anything that's in that home that's illegal is subject to being confiscated and you're being prosecuted.
That is fine.
Okay. Just want to make sure people understand that.
No.
All right.
I called it Officer Dracula. It's like, Dracula can't do nothing unless you invite him in.
Right.
Once you invite him in, it's off to the races.
Right.
And two, the problem, and one of the problems too that I later said with body cams. If somebody comes to your door, they have a body cam on. Hey, we got a noise complaint. Oh yeah, sorry, officer, that's not me. Close the door. Later on, they go to review the body cam footage, and they see under the couch there's an object. What's that under the couch? Is that enough to then go trigger? We need to go back there and see. I think that's a weapon under the couch. Then you come back to my house, do a search in my house, and you find out it was a dust bunny. So there's a lot of dangers with home visits and all that. So I'm very citizen rights aware, and it makes it difficult for to get the weapons and the drugs and all that. But we have to strike the fine balance between maintaining our rights and maintaining our protections with safety.
Can I ask a question to Jamal?
Yeah, you can. I just you can. But I just want to put this out there for you as well, because I think it's important. These different perspectives is that my question is, how do we get people like Dave and Jamal in the same room? Because I think that the collaboration of these type of ideas and seeing, because absolutely, because I think like Dave was at these community meetings on a weekly, and it wasn't something that he just say, let me just get up and see if I can save this community. He saw a problem, and I applaud him for approaching it, because a lot of folks just was ignoring these problems and didn't want to even tackle them because they knew there was going to be the pushback. So go ahead and ask your question to Jamal, because I think you two should definitely
I appreciate you bringing that up, because that is an important thing. And by the way, when I got involved with the Operation Homefront, I didn't see that element of it. So it may have been a result of your work and advocacy that moved it in a different direction. What I saw was parents. I had a mother who said, "You're an answer to my prayer. I didn't know what I was going to do with my son. He wasn't listening to me." Right? So that's the kind of side I observed in my own personal participation. But your point is well taken. So what would you advise or suggest, Jamal, might be a way to do that kind of thing? So if a school identifies a kid who's he got in a fight, he keeps getting in fights, or he's just creating havoc in the class, and they feel like they need the community engagement to be an influence and to maybe a resource. What would you see as an alternative or a way for schools to network with the community? Because I'll say this: I think in my own life, how many people did it take to raise me?
Yeah.
I had my extended family, aunts and uncles, cousins, a church community, coaches. There's a lot of community there in my history, and maybe for some kids they don't have that for different reasons. And can we connect them to that? So anyway, what would you think might be some ways for community and schools to partner in a way that would be effective and support parents?
So that's good. So because this is weaves right into where I was going anyway.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So when you also talked about the Boston Miracle, right? The Boston Miracle is one of the biggest loads of malarkey that has ever been laid on the city of Boston. So now it's like the guy who is now in his 50s or 60s and tells you, that he was the tough guy in high school. He was running everything. And then you go back and talk to some of these people. They're like, who, Tony? Oh, no. And nobody else views him like that. So the Boston Miracle has been a story that has now been retold, basically to give an advantage to the police and the clergy. And in the city of Boston, there is this romanticized relationship that has always gone on with the police and the clergy. Right now, I think we have clergy who is running, the trauma response in the city of Boston. We have multiple nonprofit agencies that are supposed to be dealing with the violence and whatnot. These are all run by religious people. We have really, literally, only God knows how many churches in this community, from Blue Hill Ave, Mattapan Square, down to Dudley, is like literally over 57. Okay, so we can't, look, I can't tell you that I control the rodent population in Boston, and I am the greatest rodent control expert ever, and there's rats all over. Both of those things can't exist, okay? So the people who say that they do this work, it's an admission that they're either incompetent or they're lying, okay? So all of the stuff that we've done about violence really has not worked. The one thing that did work in the time period that has been typified as the so-called Boston Miracle, and the people who are conveniently left out every time this story is retold, is the Nation of Islam. And the work that went behind the walls, in the prisons, from the ballers and the shot callers, who put the word out and created, effectively, a truth, along with the hip-hop community. Shout out to the almighty RSO, Made Men. They got together, created a group, Wise Guys, and they put together, I think it's 11 of the most feuding hoods in Boston, people who wanted to kill each other, put them together as a rap supergroup, and miracle, all the beef stopped. And so that part gets forgotten. So to my point, to his question and to my point, we have to examine this myth of the answer to solving some of our issues around violence as bringing in clergy. Clergy is no good if you are not trained in the area that you're supposed to be in. So if you are not a counselor or a psychologist who deals with kids or whatever, why are you around kids? Like Jesus imbibed you with magical powers, and all of a sudden now you're a child psychologist. It doesn't work that way. And most of the clergy that I know, and I know many, are very much out of touch with the streets.
Right. So
very much.
But to that point as well, so we know what we have in place currently is not effective, right? And what happens is the people who they say they don't want the most to be involved with young people is law enforcement, right? And I'm not against not having law enforcement dealing with young people in a negative way. The problem that comes is that by default, when all these others break down, the call to 911, they don't call 311 City Hall. They call 911 when a 6-year-old or 7-year-old is out of control. And I always push back and say, how many more adults do you need to send to that building, right? Not one with a firearm, not one with police powers, because we're not equipped. We're trained to deal with negative interactions in that way, right? Civil disturbances of that nature. We're not social workers. We get a little training in those areas, but again, by default, it always falls back on law enforcement when order breaks down. And these are young people that they claim that the reason why they moved this age group up because this population was better suited in dealing with them. But I'm not seeing that happening, because also to that point, and Dave and Jamal, I like your way, because this has a huge impact on the community. I go to a lot of things. The Burger King. I was just at a meeting recently where they were saying the kids are taking over the libraries and businesses downtown. It's all over the city. But when it impacts certain communities more than others, there's more of an uproar about this behavior, and we now must do something about it. So, gentlemen, because we've got the calls are piling. I'm gonna get your answer, and then I'll bring that other caller in. Is that I know there's no magic bullet, but if we're pushing towards a solution, how do we get there? Because this is impacting the community. Well, these kids don't just inflict this in the schools; they're exhibiting it outside of the schools as well.
Exactly. Well, and Jamal, let me just respond, because you're making some very good points. I mean, let's face it. I'm a pastor, so I'm in that clergy category, and we have to get outside the church building. Mm-hmm. We have to engage with people out in the communities, in the street, and including young people. It's important, and the beginning is to just say hello, greet people, meet people, connect with people. And that's, I always find that's a critical thing. Mm-hmm. But what I'm finding is parents who are dealing with children who don't feel like they have that the kids are listening to them, and then those kids, and Larry's pointed out some current situations, who are then in the community not listening to any people of authority, mm-hmm. and it becomes dangerous and hazardous and a huge problem. So then, how can we engage around school safety issues and then community safety issues? There's both of those play together. So it has like a young man whose mom says, he's not doing what he needs to do. He's getting involved in some bad activity, and he's not coming home. And I don't know what to do, because I tell him to come home, and he doesn't. Right. Because I want to get Jamal. So Jamal, to today's question, because like I said, I want to bring another caller in. Who does that parent call in Dave's situation? Who do you think is the best person to call? If the parent is saying, I can't deal with this, who should they be calling, if anyone?
This is what I was trying to say. Right tool for the right job. Mm-hmm. Our fact that we think that clergy is the answer. Look, I was that kid, bro. Mm-hmm. I was smart as hell, did everything in school, but my absentees was crazy, either due to suspensions or I just didn't go to school. I was selling drugs, I was taking drugs, guns, carrying machetes, all this type of thing. So I get it. I was that kid. My point is that if you would have showed up at my doorstep and met 17-year-old me, mm-hmm. I would have either laughed you out of my hallway mm-hmm. or physically removed you out of my hallway. Okay. You wouldn't have been able to handle me. So the fact that you think that you could have come on Humboldt Avenue and talked to 17-year-old Jamal about whatever is just laughable, mm-hmm. because I was one of them unreachable kids. Yeah. So drastic mm-hmm. times call for drastic measures. Mm-hmm. We need a specialist who knows how to deal with these special nutcases, whatever that is, a negotiator or whatever it is, because I needed help, mm-hmm. and I was not open to receiving. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Would you have listened to a negotiator if they came in?
Okay, first of all, I would have listened to probably somebody, first of all, black, mm-hmm. somebody who I respected, who I think, was from the streets. And mind you, once again, I know all these black preachers. Even the ones who were like, we used to come from the streets. You was in the 1970s. What you had, a Saturday night special? It's very different. You know what I mean? I came up with Uzis and stuff like this. You know what I mean? And these guys, last time they dealt with some drugs, it was some reefer in a manila envelope. We over here with pounds of weed and, kilos. And so it was just a different vibe. And so you need to have somebody who speaks that language, but who is also not totally consumed by it. That is also the problem with the street workers, where you had some of these brothers who are out there trying to talk to these young boys, but they're still half dipping in and engaged in some of the activities of the street.
I equate it as they're playing cops and robbers. Jamal, stand by. I want to bring this other caller into this conversation. Good morning, caller. Welcome to the roundtable.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have some solutions. They're not popular or cool to a certain extent, but it goes like this, and these are my solutions, not anybody's. Mm-hmm. Number one, the parents, both single parents and two parents, have to stop compromising with these elected officials. Number two, let's be clear.
Well, let's break down number one. When you say compromise with elected officials, what do you mean by that?
not letting these elected officials keep playing these mind games or these psychological games with the single parents and parents, thinking that, oh, I as a politician knows what's best or better for your kid or kids. So that's what I mean by.
So if I take it what you're saying as well, because I'm noticing that it's an election year here in the city, and I'm seeing the city councilors that I haven't seen before, or their staff now showing up in the community looking for votes, and then it's like, you know, when they break into the news breaks in and they said, oh, we now return to our regularly scheduled programming, right? Is that once they get what they want, we won't see them until the next election cycle. So is that what you mean on your first point?
Yes.
Okay. And your second point?
My second point is because I'm a realist. So
okay.
You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, huh?
So you're saying that 17-year-old Jamal that you were talking about.
It doesn't matter if it's 17, 16, 15, or whatever, a teenager. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved.
Okay.
Again, even though it sounds hurtful or hateful, I'm just speaking my opinion. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, what the parents must understand, both single parents and two parents, is do the basics. Sit down with your kid and kids, talk to them, ask them questions like, what's wrong? Are you doing good in school? What is it that they're bothering them? Whether it's sports, math, subject, whatever. Have a simple, basic one-on-one or one-on whatever conversation with your kids, because the last time I checked, the kids are human beings, and yes, they will open up to you.
So stand by for a second. I want to get the response from the other two. I'll go to you first, Jamal. What are you on his 3 points there? What do you have to say?
So, I'm going to focus on for the parents. Yeah. So we have all of those points are valid for people who are already engaged. But as you know, we have many parents who do not vote. We have many parents who do not engage in their kids' activity or whatever. They themselves are in a state of disarray. They themselves are in need of services, right? So that's kind of where, when we make laws, we don't make laws for the best of times and best of situations. We make laws for the worst of it, right? To catch those folks who might be falling through the cracks. So that's why, in my view, what we need to do is bolster up the people who respond to that. It's like we know that there's an area where we don't have enough people in the service provider area. Look, I've been trying to get counseling. Do you know I've been trying to get a counselor for 2 years? Okay, it's just like they're all booked up. They're not taking new appointments. They're not messing with you unless you got top dog insurance. Thank God I got it, better insurance now, but even now it's still crazy. I had people literally tell me when I had mass health, oh, we don't do mass health here. So there are people out there who need services, and we don't have that. And often in my community, what ends up happening is people who don't need services end up getting clergy.
Right.
Clergy, clergy who are going to go to court with you. Why? Are you an attorney? Clergy to go to the hospital with you. Why? Are you a doctor? Like, clergy is just the fix-all for everything. It's like Gorilla Glue or something.
Right. You got way more words. So, Dave, I want to just a good point.
Man, Jamal, you're hitting the clergy pretty hard today.
With super glue.
No, you just get hit today. Yeah. I've been hitting the clergy hard for 20 years.
Right.
Hey, so listen, though. Let me say this to that point. As a clergy person, I do have to know my limitations, absolutely. So if somebody needs some serious mental health counseling, I'm not that person, and I need to connect them with the larger resources. And yet at the same time, I can be an influence and a help. And sometimes mental health includes a broad array of things, including more relationships with people in the community, including clergy. And clergy can connect you with a church community. That community itself, having people around you that you're building relationships, can be so critical to help people in their mental health issues, to know people care about you.
Right.
I mean, I know in my church community, if you're in we're praying for you. We're loving you. if you run into a little financial issue, we're going to do what we can to help you. And so you got people standing with you. You're not alone. And so all of that can go. That can go a great way to help people with their mental health issues, right? So it's not the only thing. We need good mental health professionals.
Right, but as Jamal was alluding to, there's a shortage of them. So we've only got a couple of minutes left in this segment. So I just want to throw this out there. So in Boston, between public, private, charter schools, there's roughly around 75 to 80,000 students, and I mean students. I'm not talking about what district they're in. Students in the system every day. Dave, what is the participation and involvement from what you've been doing with SOS as far as parental involvement out of that? Because I'm saying that's a large number, so there should be a large number of parents invested. Are you seeing those numbers reflective, as the caller was alluded to, is that's how politicians get away with this if folks are not paying attention in a way that holds them accountable? Are you seeing parents engaged in a meaningful way, in that way?
Yeah, they're engaged at different levels at their capacity. I mean, parents, you're dealing with your own children and caring for them. You're doing work. You have a job. So there's only so much bandwidth in terms of involvement in organizations beyond what you're able. So we're seeing people at different levels. We do see people who are jumping in both feet and trying to make a difference. I think some parents just don't know what to do, don't know how to make a change, and they're only, they're dealing with their own child's education and whatever else is going on around that. So it's hard to look at the bigger picture in some cases. So we're trying to be a voice, and we want to connect with parents who are interested to take that advocacy role and to let the folks who are in political power know what they think, to let their voice be heard. We want to amplify that.
And to that point, Dave, because I know is how does one get engaged with your organization, and how can they reach out to SOS Saving Our Schools?
Great question. I think the best way is you can go to our website, and there's a place where you can email us that, hey, I want to join. And joining means you're going to get put on an email list. You're going to know when our meetings are. You're going to be able to hear our strategies and what we're thinking, the issues we're looking at. And so that's a key way to do it.
Okay.
Through our website, bostonsos.com.
Wow. Jamal, we got about a minute. Give you 30 seconds of it. Did we lose Jamal?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was on mute. Just give my information to David so we can get connected offline and talk about it. It sounds like you're trying to do a great thing. I would just offer some. Yeah. So I heard last week with him and Renee as well. Yeah. So I would just like to offer some different perspectives and hopefully we can work together.
I know. And I think this, and see, that's what I'm saying is that this is what we try to do here is bring like minds in a sense, and they'll always agree on all the issues, but that people who are genuinely are looking for a positive outcome, not just out there trying to grab some attention. And Dave, I know he that's not him. I mean, this is something he just, because he got consumed with what was going on there and felt like no one was doing anything, he's trying to at least do something. And I applaud anyone that's just like yourself, Jamal. I applaud folks who are willing to step up and try to fill a void when others who are tasked and actually compensated to do so are MIA. So gentlemen, thank you. Time is not our friend here. We have to take our break. Dave, like I said, we're going to keep this as a regular segment to allow you to come on and really keep this issue. Can I just
jump in quick for the second caller? And one other thing for Jamal. The second caller mentioned about parents. I mean, I think that is a thing. Sometimes it's parents who themselves weren't parented very well and don't have the capacity. So maybe that's something we need to look at in terms of school safety, that we're talking about. Parents need help to know how to parent, maybe, and find ways to do that. Not to make people feel badly about that, but that there's an education that goes on in parenting for everybody that we're continuing to learn. So that would be one thing. And to Jamal, to your point,
you know what, Dave, do you have a couple of minutes? Because I don't want to end it on that, and we're going to take a break. And if you guys can hold on, we can give it another few minutes on the other side.
Sure.
Okay. Because I think it's important. I don't want to rush it out of here. So you're listening to the Roundtable with Men. We're going to take our break. Jamal, can you guys hold on?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. All right. And we're going to take our break, and we'll be right back.
In 1 year, Boogie will tell you I'm on it. I got unreleased songs for days, they don't want it. Eat any MC in the game. It ain't a challenge if your music reflects you.